Welcome to the Cash Confident Podcast. I'm BRIE, your fearless host, personal finance expert, and the visionary behind the revolutionary Cash Confident community. Oh, welcome back to the Cash Confident Podcast with BRIE. Today, we are talking about mindset changes. And this is a topic that people come see me for. This is the reason that most of my clients come see me. Really around how to change their mind, how to think differently, how to see the world differently. And so I'm going to go over some of the skills just to give some context, right? So in this episode, I'm going to go over some of the skills that you need to have to be able to, it's not even like control over your mind. It's more just like have a trained mind. You know, I feel like changing our mind is kind of like training a dog, where it's like you're never going to have perfect control over your mind. Your mind is going to think thoughts. Your mind's going to get choppy. Your mind's going to do what it does, and it's a survival mechanism. But in time, you can really train your mind. And the more that you learn how to work with your own mind, the more powerful you will become as a person. The more powerful like your manifestation will be. So I'm gonna take you a little bit behind the scenes, and I'm gonna teach you some of the skills that I work with my clients on building. All right. So when it comes to mindset, our mental realm, the reason why our mental realm is so important is because, first of all, our mind leads our mind leads our focus, and our focus leads our vibe. Right. So I'm going to just ground this with a little example for you. So let's just say you were to think about somebody that you care about, and you were to make a list of every time that they pissed you off, every time that you are annoyed with them, every bad habit they have, everything about them they should change. You're going to end up feeling one kind of way. Right. And we're going to say it's probably not going to feel great. That's not the direction of those thoughts is not going to take you to a place that feels great. So we're taking your focus, we're using your thoughts, and we're leading you to a place that probably feels bad. Now, if you were to think about the same person and think of every wonderful thing, every great attribute, every asset, every, wonderful thing about them, you're probably going to come away feeling really good. Right. And so that's what I mean when we think about our thoughts leading our vibe. Now, this is important because this impacts the way that you show up in the world. It impacts the way that you speak. It impacts the tone of your voice. It impacts your body language. It impacts the decisions that you make, the actions that you take. And so having control of our mind, and again, we're going to use the word control very, very loosely, but having some authority over your mental realm really, really increases your power. All right. So one of the first things that we want to talk about when it comes to a money mindset, or really just a mindset in general, skill set, the first thing that you want to learn is how to observe your thoughts. And the reason why this is so important is because it puts a little distance between you, the being, and the mental thinking. Right. And so this is, for most people, this is a meditation practice, although you don't have to like sit and, with your legs crossed and, get perfectly still to start observing your mind. You can just start to listen to your mind and just kind of be more curious about it. Right. So that like curiosity. So if your mind is saying things on a regular basis, like, sometimes your mind's going to shit talk you or shit talk situations or whatever. You could just be like, wow, that's an interesting idea. That's just interesting. And when we're observing rather than being in the thoughts, it adds a little, it just adds a little distance. It adds a little separation. And from there, we can start to do something with that. But all of the skills that I will talk about today really require a certain level of awareness. It requires a certain level of observation, right? And so how you would start to observe the mind is you just start to listen to it. And that's pretty much it. And then from there, we can get into the evaluation and the other things. But it's really just like, if you sit still for a few minutes and you just start to notice the thoughts that are running through your mind, That's what I'm talking about, the observation of it. If you get a little better at that and you can start to do it more like naturally, where you don't need to like carve out a container for yourself, you can observe your words, you can observe your attitudes, you can observe, in time, you can observe your judgments, you can observe, the way certain things make you feel, or, and you can start to connect, story in that mental realm, to the way that your emotions, you start to connect it to your emotions. So observation is probably the first skill. If you want to change your mind, learning to observe your thoughts is the foundation. Everything else that I'm going to talk about is, it's just not as helpful if you cannot independently observe your mind. Now, I will also say that once you become skilled in this, there will still be blind spots. Like, this is the reason why people have coaches. This is the reason people, most of my clients, I'm not their first coach. I'm not their first, this isn't their first rodeo. Most of these people come to see me with a skill set around their personal development, but I just see things a little different than they do. And so where I'm going with this is, even in the observation, most of your observation, you're going to be able to do just fine on your own. But sometimes you might need a practitioner. Sometimes you might need somebody who's just going to listen to this, because the way that our belief structures are formed is it's just normal to us. So you might think of something as just being like true, normal, like everyday, regular things. And somebody else who has a different set of ideas may see that as like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting idea. And that, so sometimes the observation, sometimes you can be blind to yourself, but most of the time you're gonna, be able to find your thoughts, right? And so the more that you pay attention to your mind, the more that you're going to be able to question yourself and be like, ooh, do I think this is true? Do I think that is true? What do I think needs to happen here for this to be a success? But really, all of these are observational techniques. So when we're observing, what we're doing is we're taking our focus and we're putting it on the mind. We're putting our focus on the mind itself. So like I said, you could sit with yourself a few minutes a day. You could take a walk, sit with yourself. You could listen to the words that come out of your mouth. You could even observe the feelings that you have. And the observation is the important part, because it's the part that separates you. It's the difference between like swimming in the ocean or being in a boat on the ocean. It just separates you from the choppiness a little bit, right? All right. So observation. Now, the second skill that you're going to want to acquire for changing your mental realm is really around examining and questioning truth. I have a little cold today. So I'm just drinking my tea, just doing my best here. All right. So examining truth. So listen, the first maybe 10 years of your life, your conscious mind isn't really fully formed, right? So that's especially true from like before you're 7. So the vast majority of the learning that you've done happened before you were like 10 years old. Like most of the ways that how to be a human and interact in this earth, and in your family and just be a human, you learned before you could consciously really question whether or not this was a good idea, whether or not this is true, whether or not anything. So you have ideas that are true to you. You have ideas that were true in the past. You have ideas that were true for your parents, or true, that were true. Now, truth is a funny thing because there are fragments of truth, right? So let's just say this. Let's say I grew up in a situation where I never got to go on family vacation. It just wasn't a thing. That's true. I experienced that, right? Now let's just say I have a friend whose parents took her on vacation 2-3 times a year. That experience is also true, right? She also had the truth of that experience. So where this comes to be important is because when we have unexamined truths, they're just operating as just pure truth, right? So if I didn't get to go on vacation, I'm not going to see it as quite as possible. I'm not going to see it as affordable. I'm not going to see it as anything it's going to be further away from me. And more likely, I'm going to recreate a situation where I don't go on vacation, because that past and those truths are going to be playing out, and they're going to be impacting, like I said, they're going to be impacting the way that what I believe. They're going to be impacting what I focus on. They're going to be impacting my financials, my actions, my choices, my attitudes, everything else. So the thing about this that becomes really important is most of us that are doing this personal development game, most of us who are working on our money mindset. I mean, if you're working on your money mindset, it's because you want something different than you've had, right? Like, nobody comes to see me and is like, Brie, I have the best money mindset ever, and I'm wealthy and I'm rich in all the ways that matter. No, nobody's coming to see me and saying that mess. They're coming to see me like, Brie, I'm doing the same crap my parents did. Brie, I make a lot of money and I'm just as broke as I was before I made a lot of money, right? So if you're listening to this podcast, if you're coming to see me, chances are you want something different. And so examining a truth is one of the ways where we start to get power, because our mind only wants really what's true in there. So this is a place where we get to start to examine truths. We gets to start just being like, is it true? And not, is it true like we're going to make up stories about our past. Like, let's just say I didn't get to go on family vacations. And that's true. Well, it's true, but it's also not the truth of the future. Right? It was true in the past, but it's not true in the future. But if I don't examine those belief structures that add limitation, that add difficulty to the idea of vacation, I'm probably not going to be able to go on vacation. Right? So I will commonly see with like ideas of money is hard. Generational poverty is a thing because there's all of these belief structures that then impact thoughts, attitudes, actions, possibilities, ways of being, right? So if you grew up in generational poverty, you're going to have some truths that were true to you, that you grew up and you did experience and are true. But if you're not looking to recreate that, you have to examine whether or not you want to be operating on those same truths. So examining your ideas and being like, ooh, is this true? Is it true that it's hard to go on family vacation? Is it true that money is hard to come by? Is it true? And when you honestly, a lot of belief structures that you have in your mind, sometimes that question is enough to change your mind. Sometimes just the, is this true? And when you see that, you're like, well, it was true, but it doesn't have to be true. Or it was true for me, but it wasn't true for other people. This gives you so much power to start to like really like, and it's a very gentle process. So when I'm working with clients, it's one of the places that will kind of start is just becoming the observer and then questioning, is this true? Is this idea true? Is it valid? Is it and also secondarily, is it the way that I want it to be? Right? So examining your truths is, and that's not work that you'll like do for a few months. That's ongoing. That is ongoing work until you probably cease to exist. Well, if you want to keep growing, I guess. If you want to keep growing and expanding. So examining the truth is you just find, basically the process around it is you find an idea and then you just question it. Is it true? Do I want this to be true? And then in time, you can kind of start to see like, well, if I believe this is true, how would that impact my actions and behaviors? And if I believe something else is true, how would that impact my actions and behaviors? And that is an interesting process to see how that will go. All right. So that's the second skill. So the third skill that you want to have is to really break or install a belief. Now, a belief is just a thought that you've thought many, many times. And most of the time, you're going to believe it to be true. And most of the time, a belief is going to have some evidence, right? Most of the time, it's not just like any old thought. It's something that you believe to be true because there is evidence. So breaking a limiting belief is, it's a very similar to examining a truth. It's a little bit more vigorous, I'll guess, right? Let me give you an example. So I had a client once who had spent most of her life really not earning very much money, not earning very much money at all. And we were talking about this because she's skilled, like she's got a lot of skills and she's valuable. And she was like, "Oh, well, I didn't go to college, so I'm just like never going to make a lot of money." And I was like, "What? What?" And she's like, "Yeah, if you don't go to college, you just can't make a lot of money. You need the college degree to make a lot of money." And I was like, "Absolutely not. Hard no. Wait, not true at all." And she was like, "What do you mean not true?" She's like, and she has evidence of this because she's gone her entire life believing this. And so she's got stories and decades of what's called cognitive bias. And it took us a while to break down that belief structure because it was so ingrained. It was so, like it had been a foundational pillar of who she believed she was and what she was worth and the value she could bring to the table for literally decades. I mean, I think she came to see me in her early 60s. So we're talking 40 years of employment situations where she has evidence of being undervalued because she believed that the higher pay was just not accessible to her. And so she wasn't looking for higher pay because she just didn't even believe it was possible, right? So breaking a belief sometimes requires the questioning, but it also requires building evidence to the contrary. So we went through and we started to look at like jobs that you don't need a college degree for that make a lot of money. People that she knows, that make a lot of money that don't have a college degree, like going on and on, because now what we're starting to do is build a case for the other side of that argument, which is I can make a lot of money because I want to make a lot of money. I don't necessarily need a college degree. Now, listen, depending on your field of work, that may or may not be true. Like if you want to be a surgeon, you're going to need a degree if you don't want to go to jail, right? Like it's just the way that it goes. But it's not true inherently that I will tell you point blank that education is not equal to income. They're just not the same. There's lots of uneducated people making a ton of money. And I don't mean like, I mean uncollege educated, right? Like people without a college degree that make a ton of money. And there are people who have doctorates who can't pay their rent. Like it's just unrelated. Like it could be correlated, but there's just like correlation is not causation. So even if it's money and education are correlated, it's not the education that causes the money. It's just not. Right. So we start to question a belief structure to take it down. And then we start to find evidence for the new belief that we want to put back in. So that's how to break and install a belief pattern. Now, down the road, I'm going to be offering a course that will be called Wired for Wealth. And I'm going to be diving into these things like in detail because these are the skill sets that once you have mastery over your mental faculties, like your ability to shift, to become, to like your level of personal power is just infinitely more when you can change your mind, because the mind is plastic and you can change it over and over again as you need to. Like the same way if you learned something new today, like your mind is plastic. So you can keep an eye out for that. All right. So the fourth thing that I want to teach you today is how to remove a judgment. Now, a judgment it's like a belief structure in that there's thoughts, but it's a little deeper. It goes to different. It goes out deeper than just the mental realm into the realm of generally it's going to be identity, and generally it's going to go all the way down to safe or dangerous. So your judgments help you to navigate the world, where a belief is really more about the world itself. And they're really similar mental structures, so just bear with me on this, but this is the way that I see it. This is when I'm working with clients, I'm going to treat a judgment differently than I'm going to just treat a regular old limiting belief. Right. So the client that I was talking about before who had the thing about a degree, that wasn't about her personally. It was just like, oh, you need this degree to be able to make a lot of money. I don't have that degree. There was no judgment. There was no like separation of what she was willing or not willing to do. So judgments, I generally find that they kind of work themselves down in a few layers, right? So in the mental realm, it's going to be like, oh, this is right or wrong or good or bad, or I'm going to do this or not do this. And then sometimes there'll be a secondary layer of like, well, why not? And it could be like, oh, that'd be a greedy thing to do and I'm not going to do that. Or that would be a selfish thing to do and I'm not going to do that. And so then you can start to see the secondary judgments around, what it needs to be. And then if you go down a layer deeper, there's generally going to be the idea of safe or dangerous, right? It's dangerous to be selfish because then people won't love me, or it's dangerous to be greedy because I'm going to get, kicked out of the community. And just remember that humans are community animals. We're family creatures. So anything that you would do that could potentially get you kicked out of your people, kicked out of your community, your brain is going to see that as actual threat of death, actually dangerous. So judgments help us navigate ourselves through the maze of life. Right. And so a lot of times there's just a wall of separation where it's like, all right, well, I'm willing to be generous, but I'm not willing to be greedy because being generous is good and being greedy is bad. Well, I'm willing to be selfless and self-sacrificing, but I'm not willing to be selfish because being selfish is bad and wrong, and being selfless is good and kind and pious. Right. So there's generally like an air of morality. Now, all judgments serve a purpose, and sometimes our judgments get too small, and sometimes they need to be moved, right? So for example, most of the clients who come to see me, one of the judgments we're working on is really around greed. So clients are like, I don't want to be greedy. And I'm like, well, you're not going to, breaking down a judgment doesn't it won't make you a greedy person. It just opens up the landscape that you can play in. So you could be okay to be both generous and greedy, right? And what's interesting around generous and greedy is there's connotations there that make it seem good and bad and right and wrong when it's really just balanced or out of balance. So to be generous, you have to have something, right? You have to have received something. And being generous is the ability to give without expectation of reciprocation. Right? So if I'm picking up the tab for dinner, it's not necessarily reciprocal. I'm just buying you dinner, right? Well, then that means that you would have to receive that gift, that generosity, without the expectation of reciprocation. And it could be reciprocation in the moment or reciprocation down the road or whatever, right? So there's not a word for just graciously receiving. Right. So it's like greedy and generous are the opposites, but greedy's got negative connotations and generous has positive connotations. And so this is where the judgment starts to be formed. So we have to kind of look at those and break those down, because when we're not willing to be half of something, we just lose a lot of power. We lose a lot of power. We lose a lot of things. And when we're on the wrong side of our judgments, when we would have to take actions that would put us on the wrong side of our judgments, we're going to have so much resistance. We're going to feel bad. We're going to not want to do the things. So in business, this, like for a lot of people, this shows up in sales. I don't want to be salesy. We have a lot of negative kind of, ideas about salespeople, even though that's nonsense. But if you're not willing to sell, you're going to have a real hard time in business. If you're not willing to receive, you're going to have a real hard time in business. If you're not willing to put yourself out there and potentially be annoying or be too much or be whatever kind of social conditionings you have that would put you on the wrong side of your own judgment, you're going to have a real hard time with money. It's just facts. You just are. So when I'm working with clients, we look a lot at judgments, because judgments impact how you maneuver life. All right. So that's the fourth thing. All right. The next thing that I want to teach you about is about direction of thought. So when we started this this conversation, we opened up and I was like, well, think about everything bad around, somebody you love, all the annoying things, all the little ugly bits. And what does that feel like? And then think about, everything good, right? Those two things are going to feel really different. And so being able to focus on an outcome and then redirect that focus and redirect it back and redirect when you get off, or notice how you feel and then just redirect your thoughts. That ability to control your focus is one of the most powerful things that you can do. It is incredible the level of difference that being able to redirect the thought and not entangle yourself up with the things that you don't want, but really just refocusing yourself on what you do want and refocusing your thoughts on things that feel in the direction of where you're going and that feel good. That is one of the most important skills. If you listen to Abraham Hicks at all, if you've ever listened to any of her work, basically she spends a lot of time talking about this. She doesn't always call it that. She says choose a better feeling thought, but that's really what we're talking about here. And actually, also in the very near future, I'm going to be offering a masterclass called The Astonishing Power of Directional Focus, just so that I could teach this. This is it's a skill that every single person wants to have. It's one of the most important skills that you could have for maintaining mindset, and it's really more for clean manifestation. It's going to help you manifest your things much more cleanly and clearly. All right, I have some other things, so I think I'm going to do a part 2 of this episode. But so these are the first 5 things that these are skills that you can learn around how to change your mind, how to see the world differently, how to feel the world differently, and things like that. So I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing with me. Please share this with a friend. Leave a review. And I will talk to you next week. Bye, everybody.